Let's make a Star Wars inspired cantina and talk about how to draw a top-down sci-fi building map. I'm making a new Starborg Subspace Datacron zine for my Patreon this month, and I want to include a cool cantina map for game masters to use for their games. And I think these sci-fi blueprint style maps are super fun to draw, and they don't have to be difficult to draw either. In fact, you don't need any drawing experience to make a map like the one I'm going to be drawing in this video. Let me show you my process. Now, before I actually start drawing, I like to spend a little bit of time getting inspired. Recently, I got this Star Wars complete location book, and it's got some killer hand-drawn maps inside. This Mos Eisley Cantina one is so stinking cool. It's a cross-section style map filled with little drawings of all the characters that you see in the cantina in A New Hope. Now, the map that I'm going to teach you how to draw in this video is way more simple to illustrate than this one, but that doesn't mean you can't take inspiration from cool illustrations like this. I studied this map and it helped me write up a list of rooms that I want to be in my cantina. There's a bar and booths and an office for the owner, a stage for the band, and a loading bay, stuff like that. I love this underground tunnel with a caustic pit where they throw unwanted items and bodies. So I'm including one of those in my cantina as well. And while I was poring over this map, kind of studying it for ideas, there are two main things that stood out to me. First is all of the weird shaped rooms. Like, there's very little symmetry going on in this architecture. There's lots of round and trapezoidal rooms. I feel like this building would be really challenging to build, but that's what kind of makes it sci-fi, is that, in the future, building a building like this wouldn't be that difficult. So it's still kind of practical to have all these weird rooms and stuff. And the second thing is all of the greebles. It's the stuff that makes Star Wars, all the little bits and bobs all over the place. The technology and mechanical things that kind of make sense, like the cool drink dispensers that are droid heads behind the bar. But really, it's mostly just for decoration and to give it that Star Wars feel. So those are the 2 points, the weird layout and the greebles, that I'm going to keep in the back of my head. And they're the things that will take my map from being a generic cantina to a cool looking sci-fi Star Wars inspired cantina map. Okay, I've got a sheet of grid paper. I like to use this light blue grid. It's called non-photo blue, so it's easy to scan and clean up the drawing in the computer, but whatever graph paper you have is gonna work. I'll also be using a pencil and some micron pens, but again, you can draw a cool map with whatever tools you have. I'll have a link to all the tools I'm using down in the description, so if you want to use the same tools, I got you covered. Okay, let's get into this drawing. I'm starting by sketching out the layout of the Lucky Smuggler Cantina. Keeping that inspiration in mind, I'm trying to have minimal symmetry happening, throwing in some curved walls and weird angles wherever I can. But at the same time, I'm trying to make sure that I have every room on my list covered. I need a storage room and the kitchen and the power generator and the hidden stairs down to that caustic pit. Once I have the layout where I like it, I'm gonna grab a fat Posca marker. I'm using a PC5M and trace over the walls. I want the walls to be really bold and stand out because there's going to be a lot of detail with all of the greebles and bits and bobs later on. If everything in this drawing is the same line width, it's going to look really busy and it's going to be hard to tell what's going on. So thick walls is a must for this style of map. But notice how I'm leaving space to draw in the doors. I'll come back with the smaller micron pens for those later. Now that the shell of the building is figured out, well, it actually kind of looks like it could be a fantasy dungeon map right now, but that's where all the greebles inspiration comes in. So I'm going to go back and start adding a bunch of details like the tables and chairs and mechanical stuff. I'm not 100% confident to jump straight into inking those details, so I'm using a pencil to figure out all that stuff first. Certain things like the tables and chairs can be really simple shapes, not much different than a fantasy style map. You know, a table is literally just a circle and the chairs are squares and they'll have a little extra line to indicate where the back of the chair is. But things like the power generator or the parked speeder are going to be the things that make this map feel futuristic. Technically, they are more complicated to draw just because they have more lines, but really they're just made up of collections of circles and squares and a few tiny lines and dots. Once I'm confident enough with the pencil drawing, then I go back in with the micron pens and trace over everything. I'm using a size 10 for the main shapes and then a size 8 for the trickier, smaller details. A size 8 and 10 are on the bigger side of a micron pen, and I like using these thicker pens because they force me to keep things simple. I can't get too detailed and nitpicky. This map is going to get shrunken down a little bit when it's printed, so if I use the smaller microns like a size 1 or a size 3 for the details, those lines might get lost in the printing. Maybe that's not something you're worrying about if you're just going to draw a map and then show it to some players, but because I'm printing this map in a zine, I want to be conscious of how it's going to look going from a hand-drawn map to a printed illustration in the zine. Okay, the nice thing about working on a grid is it helps me keep these repeated shapes mostly uniform. I'm trying to keep the tables roughly the same size, same with the chairs. And a cool trick to make the doors feel more sci-fi-ish is to put a diagonal line through them instead of just a straight line. You know, it makes them look like they will automatically slide open instead of swinging on a hinge. The other thing you might have noticed is that I'm not using a ruler for any part of this drawing, and that's because this is a Star Wars inspired map going into a zine that's all about the scum and villainy side, so the Lucky Smuggler Cantina is meant to be a little grimy, a little dingy, but if I wanted this cantina to be like truly futuristic and sci-fi, or maybe if it's a part of the Legion or like my version of the Empire, then I would probably use a ruler to get some nice straight lines. And just with that one little change up, it'll make the map look more sleek and futuristic instead of the sort of grimier side of the Star Wars inspired world. Okay, now we're into the fun stuff. These greebles are so fun to draw. And when I say greebles, do you know what I mean? All these little doodads that aren't really functional but look like they should be. I'm just making this stuff up just like the set designers did in Star Wars. You know, the only difference is instead of using an ice cream maker, I'm just drawing little circles and connecting them with lines and squiggles. And I think because I made the walls with that really bold line, I feel like I could go crazy adding in all of these little greebles everywhere. But again, I want to make sure that there's at least some empty space to draw the eye. You know, it's a fine line not to overwhelm map illustration with too much detail, because you know I'm making this cantina map to use with my game Starborg. It's a Star Wars inspired hack of Morkborg tabletop role-playing game, and I want the GM to be able to look at it quickly and get a gist of what's going on in each room. You know, there are enough of these greebles to indicate what's happening and feel appropriate to the world, but not so many that the map gets confusing and hard to look at. And then after a little bit of erasing, getting rid of those pencil lines, I got myself a finished map of the Lucky Smuggler Cantina. Super stoked on how this one turned out. I think it'll be fun to explore and see what kind of shady stuff is going on in there. Like I said, for the final zine, this map will get scanned in, colored up, shrunken down to fit on the page a little bit. I'll be adding in numbers and descriptions of all the rooms. If you'd like to see the final map and get the Subspace Datacron issue number 2, it's got a bunch of new Starborg stuff like new Rebel ships, new contraband items, and a bunch of bounty hunters and pirates and crime lords that are probably going to be hanging out in this cantina. Check out my Patreon. It's a great way to support the channel, and I'm making new zines every month. But really, I think a black and white map like this would be totally awesome to throw down on the table and share with your players. Have a fun night of gaming, exploring a cantina like this. Hopefully this video inspires you to try drawing your own sci-fi building map. It's really fun drawing all the little greebles and stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!